Have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? Have you ever had 1,000 conversations that left you feeling more isolated than silence? There's a specific kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being by yourself and everything to do with being surrounded by people who cannot meet you where you are. Today, I want to show you why some souls carry a loneliness that's not about lacking connection. It's about having depth that most people can't fathom, and why that loneliness, as painful as it is actually sacred. If you've ever felt too old for your age, too deep for small talk, too aware for ignorance, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, when did you first realize you were different? Let's recognize each other in this space. Let me take you into something Viktor Frankl observed that changed how he understood human suffering. In the concentration camps, there were people who suffered physically, but remained relatively intact emotionally. They could distract themselves. They could focus on survival. They could exist in the present horror without being crushed by it. But then there were others, the artists, the philosophers, the deeply feeling souls, who suffered on multiple dimensions simultaneously. They felt not just their own pain, but the collective anguish. They saw not just the surface cruelty, but the existential catastrophe of what was happening to human dignity. Frankl noticed that these old souls, as he called them, carried a unique burden. They couldn't unsee. They couldn't unfeel. They couldn't reduce the horror to simple survival equations, and this made them lonelier than those who could. Because even in shared suffering, they were experiencing it at a depth others couldn't access. Frankl realized, old souls don't just experience life. They experience the meaning beneath life, the weight beneath events, the truth beneath appearances. And that weight is often carried alone. Here's what Andrew Huberman's neuroscience reveals about why certain people experience this depth differently. And it's going to validate everything you've felt. The brain has what's called affective complexity, the ability to hold multiple emotional states simultaneously, to perceive nuance, to feel layers of meaning in single moments. Research shows that some people, through genetics and life experience, develop heightened activity in brain regions like the insula and anterior cingulate cortex, areas responsible for empathy, self-awareness, and emotional processing. These individuals literally process reality with more depth than the average person. They pick up on subtleties others miss. They feel undercurrents others don't notice. They see patterns across time that others can't perceive. This isn't superiority, it's neurodiversity, but it creates profound isolation because when you're perceiving 5 dimensions of a conversation and everyone else is perceiving one, you're essentially alone in your experience. Huberman's work shows that high-sensitivity individuals often feel chronically misunderstood because their nervous system is processing information that others' nervous systems aren't even registering. Napoleon Hill studied exceptional individuals for decades, and he found something that society doesn't want to acknowledge. People who think differently, who see further, who understand deeper, they pay a price. Hill called it the penalty of leadership. He noticed that visionaries, whether in business or life, were almost always lonely. Not because they couldn't find people, but because they couldn't find peers. The average person thinks in terms of immediate circumstances. The old soul thinks in terms of principles, patterns, timeless truths. The average person is concerned with comfort and approval. The old soul is concerned with meaning and integrity. Hill would tell you, this isn't about being better. It's about operating from a different framework. And different frameworks don't communicate easily. You can explain your depth to someone shallow 1,000 times, and they still won't get it. Not because they're stupid, but because they haven't cultivated the capacity to perceive what you're showing them. Pause right now and like this video if you've ever simplified yourself just to have a conversation. And comment. What's the thing about you that people consistently miss? Let's make the invisible visible together. Neville Goddard understood this loneliness from the spiritual dimension, and what he taught will either comfort you or devastate you. Goddard said that consciousness is stratified. There are levels. Most people live in the basement consciousness, concerned with survival, comparison, external validation. Some people ascend to middle floors, where they're concerned with purpose and growth. But old souls, they're living on the penthouse levels of consciousness, seeing reality from a vantage point most people will never reach. Goddard would say, you're not lonely because something's wrong with you. You're lonely because you're awake in a world that's mostly asleep. And the awake person cannot pretend to sleep to fit in. You've seen too much. You know too much. You feel too much. And that knowing creates distance from those who are still choosing ignorance. Goddard taught that like in consciousness, old souls attract each other rarely because there simply aren't that many operating at that frequency. Your loneliness isn't a problem to fix, it's evidence of your rarity. Let me tell you about Elena. From childhood, she felt ancient. While other kids played games, she was thinking about death, about purpose, about why people were cruel to each other. Her parents called her dramatic. Her teachers said she was too serious. Her peers found her weird. She learned to hide it. To laugh at jokes she didn't find funny. To care about things she didn't actually care about. But inside, she was screaming with loneliness. In her 30s, after years of therapy and self-work, she finally accepted the truth. She was an old soul in a young world, and instead of trying to dumb herself down, she leaned in. She started writing about the depths she felt. She stopped going to shallow gatherings. She stopped explaining herself to people who couldn't understand. And something beautiful happened. 3 people found her work and reached out. Just 3. But those 3 understood her instantly, completely, without translation. She told me, "I have 3 soul friends now, instead of 50 surface friends. And I've never felt less lonely, because one person who sees you is worth 1,000 who don't." Huberman's research on social connection validates Elena's experience perfectly. The quality of social connection matters infinitely more than quantity. His studies show that one deep, authentic relationship, where you can be fully yourself without performance, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reduces cortisol, and promotes well-being far more effectively than dozens of shallow connections. In fact, surface-level socializing while hiding your true self actually increases stress and loneliness. It tricks your brain into thinking you're connected when you're actually isolated behind a mask. Old souls often feel lonelier in groups because they're performing connection rather than experiencing it. Solitude is less lonely than fake belonging because at least in solitude you're with yourself, with truth. The nervous system relaxes in authentic aloneness, but stays activated in inauthentic togetherness. Frankl would frame this through his lens of meaning and suffering. He'd say, "Your loneliness has meaning. It's not random. It's the price you pay for depth, for awareness, for refusing to live superficially." Frankl believed that suffering without meaning destroys, but suffering with meaning transforms. So what's the meaning of old soul loneliness? It's the gap between perception levels. You see what others don't, feel what others can't, understand what others won't. And that seeing is both your gift and your burden. Frankl would tell you, stop trying to make unaware people understand you. Instead, use your depth to create something meaningful. Write it, teach it, build it, live it. Your loneliness is actually clarity. You're not confused about who people are, you see them clearly. And that clarity, while isolating, is also power. Hill would make this practical in his ruthless way. He'd say, stop wasting energy on people who don't have the capacity to appreciate your depth. It's like playing Mozart for someone who only hears noise. They're not wrong for hearing noise, their ear isn't trained. But you're foolish for continuing to play for them and then feeling hurt when they don't appreciate it. Hill believed in strategic relationship investment. Find the rare few who operate at your level and invest deeply there. Everyone else, cordial, kind, but boundaried. Hill would tell you, your depth is your competitive advantage in life. But only if you stop diluting it to fit in. Old souls who try to be average waste their gift. Old souls who embrace their difference change the world. Goddard would take you deeper into consciousness. He'd say, you chose this before you incarnated. You chose to come into this lifetime with heightened awareness because you have work to do that requires it. Your loneliness is part of the curriculum. It forces you inward. It makes you self-reliant. It develops your inner world to a level that couldn't happen if you were distracted by easy belonging. Goddard taught that isolation often precedes initiation. The mystics, the prophets, the awakened ones all spent time alone in the wilderness. Literally or metaphorically, before they could step into their purpose. Your loneliness isn't punishment. It's preparation. You're being forged in solitude to become someone who can hold truth that most people can't handle. I need you to pause and really feel this. Your loneliness is not evidence that you're unlovable. It's evidence that you're rare. Comment below. What would change if you stopped trying to be understood by everyone and started seeking just your few? Let's shift from quantity to quality. Here's what happens when an old soul finally accepts their nature instead of fighting it. First, there's grief. You grieve the normal belonging you'll never have. You grieve the easy friendships, the casual connections, the ability to fit in without effort. Let yourself grieve. That grief is real. But don't live there. Second, there's relief. The exhausting performance ends. You stop twisting yourself into shapes that don't fit. You stop explaining, defending, simplifying yourself for people who aren't trying to understand anyway. Your nervous system finally relaxes because you're not in constant conflict with your own nature. Third, clarity emerges. You see exactly who can meet you and who can't. You stop taking it personally. Their inability to understand you says nothing about your worth. It says everything about capacity differences. And then, the most profound thing happens. You start attracting your people. Not many, but the right ones. Old souls recognize each other instantly. There's no small talk. You dive deep immediately. There's no performance, you're just seen. These connections are rare, but they're real in a way surface connections never are. One conversation with a fellow old soul can feed you for months in a way 100 shallow interactions never could. Quality over quantity isn't just a preference. It's the only sustainable model for old souls. Frankl survived the camps partly because he found a few souls who understood what he understood. That even in hell, meaning was possible. Those rare connections sustained him more than 100 surface relationships ever could. After his liberation, he didn't try to be understood by everyone. He wrote for the few who were ready, and those few changed millions. Old souls don't need mass appeal. They need deep resonance with the right souls. Hill would tell you that every person who changed the world was misunderstood by the masses and understood by a crucial few. Lincoln, Edison, Einstein, they all experienced this loneliness. They all felt too different, but they didn't water themselves down. They found their few collaborators and changed reality. Hill would say, "Your loneliness is not a bug. It's confirmation that you're on the right path." Comfortable people don't change the world. Lonely visionaries do. Goddard would guide you into imagination right now. See yourself surrounded by souls who understand you without words. Feel what that recognition feels like. Assume it exists, not hope, assume. Because in consciousness, it already does. The physical manifestation is just catching up. Your loneliness is the void before the fulfillment. Stay in the void without collapsing into despair. Hold your frequency. Your people are finding you right now. Here's the truth that will either break you or liberate you. You will likely always feel somewhat lonely. Not because you're broken, but because you're rare. Diamonds are valuable because they're rare. Common stones are everywhere but worth nothing. Your loneliness is the price of your rarity. But it's not empty loneliness. It's sacred solitude. It's the space where you commune with deeper truth, with your own soul, with something eternal that most people never touch. Old souls aren't lonely because they lack people. They're lonely because they've touched something most people avoid their entire lives. They've felt the depths. They've seen behind the veil. They can't unsee it, and that knowing creates distance. But here's what makes it bearable. You'd rather be lonely in truth than connected in illusion. You've tried the shallow life. It was suffocating. This loneliness, as painful as it is at least honest, at least real, at least aligned with who you actually are. Frankl chose meaningful suffering over meaningless comfort. Hill chose visionary loneliness over mediocre belonging. Goddard chose mystical isolation over conventional connection. They all understood. The old soul path is narrow, steep, and often walked alone. But it leads somewhere that the wide, crowded path never reaches. If you're an old soul reading this, feeling seen for maybe the first time today, like this video and share it with another old soul who needs to know they're not crazy for feeling this way. Subscribe because this is your community. The rare ones, the deep ones, the ancient ones in young bodies. And tell me in the comments, how do you honor your old soul nature? How do you carry the loneliness with grace? Let's learn from each other. I'll see you in the next one.